Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into the Vince McMahon docuseries on Netflix. This 6-part series features episodes that run for about an hour each, totaling 6 hours of compelling content. For this review, I'll be taking a podcast-style approach, so feel free to play the episode as we go along. I hope you enjoy this in-depth look at the docuseries, and I'll be discussing it even further during my live stream tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the show. Warning: this docuseries will mention abuse, sexual assault, drug use, and more. Please be advised.
The first episode was called Junior because it explained, Vince McMahon's rise to creating what we now know as the WWE. And this next episode is titled Heat because this is where things slowly start to take a seismic shift. McMahon is growing exponentially fast. The superstars are getting more and more exposure, but they also are being worked to death. These men and women were wrestling 7 days a week. NBC was very much on the train from the beginning of knowing or seeing McMahon's vision. Theory in the early days during territories. Vince McMahon was prominently featured on TNT and, of course, on USA Network. They wanted the programming. They've enjoyed it. They have been housing WWE for years since Vince McMahon began his rise. And that is one of the reasons why when the WWE Network was created, NBC Universal was very pissed about it because they were left out of the loop. They did not get to have a piece of that pie. So it seems they've been doubling back as of lately to rectify what they did with the WWE Network. But again, that was a revolutionary thing that WWE introduced. To go back to the original topic, the superstars in the WWE back in the day were literally being worked 7 days a week. They were wrestling 7 days a week. The trauma that it took on the body and the mental capacity. And this is one of the reasons why some wrestlers didn't make it past 45 because they were concussed, they had CTE issues, or their bodies literally gave out on them, specifically due to the trauma that they took on from wrestling. And because of drugs, alcohol, coping mechanisms they use to keep going in this particular environment, then Vince McMahon just wasn't paying attention or didn't have any care or wherewithal for the longevity of his wrestlers and for the respect of them. Bret Hart was just like, I just wish we would have had a few more days off. When you look at it nowadays, there is more research into CTEs, concussions, and all of those things. And so it makes it easier. But we have somebody in charge now in WWE who is a little bit more caring about his superstars. He actually cares for their health, their well-being, the longevity of their careers, and the dedication that they put into what they do every single week. And I think that's mainly due to the fact that he had to do it. So he now understands. And there's a bit more of a camaraderie, like, you need time off, we got you. You need to, take a break, we got you. Your mom is sick, people are passing away. You're not missing funerals, you're not missing birthdays, you're not missing holidays, because they're making provisions to ensure that you can get what you need. And then that in turn will inspire your loyalty to the company, but it also is a back and forth. So to make it clear for those of you who just watched me or just came to my channel, I have a degree in organizational psychology and behavior. And one of the things that I am well aware of is how to incentivize your employees so that you can maintain their loyalty and employee retention stays on the up and up. Because Vince McMahon operated his business under the guise of, it's WWE, me, screw everybody else. The employees are the one who ended up suffering the most because they're the ones who had to do all the hard work. They're the ones who were slamming their backs on the mat. They're the ones who are fighting and doing this 7 days a week, taking on trauma, the equivalent of a car accident. It's mind blowing that they couldn't get any days off. that they were denied this, despite the fact that they were independent contractors, which means they should have had more control over their careers and what they wanted and didn't want to do. Vince McMahon didn't operate that way. He operated like they were employees, but paid them like independent contractors, treated them like independent contractors when it was convenient. And in this case, this didn't inspire a lot of respect. What it did is create an environment of cutthroat where it was sink or swim, right? But more in as you swim in shark infested waters or you sink and get eaten by shark infested water in the shark infested waters. So in this case, I feel really bad for these guys because their sacrifices and their pain, their heartache, all of the hell that they put their bodies through, all the trauma, everything that they have went through is what has now led to an industry that needed to be revived and revamped, but also an industry that needed to be given a new face. It needed to be relifted. It needed to be peeled back, cleaned out, and then researched. You know what I mean? Like the way that Triple H has now made this company into a place where people can come in, people can have time off. They can have 1 to 2 weeks off. They don't lose their spots on television if that happens. They're not considered disloyal if they decide they don't want to do something that is scheduled for them. The way Triple H works with the superstars, he treats them like human beings and not like objects. That is somebody who actually has some wherewithal of the human beings that he's working with. Vince McMahon treated his superstars like robots. They were objects to him. They were pieces in the grand scheme of things. And that is where he made his most fatal mistake, because he just didn't have the wherewithal due to his upbringing. I'm just going to tell you the truth. He didn't have the wherewithal to not dehumanize the people that worked for him, because there's no way you could have said to yourself, this is going to be healthy for you if you're slamming your back on a mat 7 days a week, if you're taking a chair shot to the head, to the body 7 days a week. You'll be fine. Don't worry about it. With no time to lay down, with no time to recover, this is what you're doing. There's no way you could have assumed that that would have worked out in the long run. And what really baffles me about Vince is that he's an all the eggs in the basket kind of guy. He will put all of his stock and everything into this one thing, no matter if it fails, win, lose, or draw. He doesn't matter. He doesn't care. He believes in it so much that he will put all his eggs in one basket, even if there's a hole in the basket. He doesn't protect himself, which is weird to me. It's weird that he didn't have the foresight to understand that there could be consequences and repercussions. Like, okay, so spin reality for a second, hear me out, and then I promise we'll get back into the show. So, like, for me, right, if I was in Vince's shoes, and I know that I was born in a different time and a different era, but Vince McMahon understood marketing, and he should have studied media as well. He also should have been paying attention, because I feel like that this was not just, Vince McMahon, is being targeted by the media type of thing. You see, you have to remember, he gutted those territories. Remember, he poached their talent, destroyed a lot of the territories due to his need for having these particular superstars in his company. And then all of a sudden they become these major stars. They're on network television, and these other promoters are just sitting at home watching. No, they threatened Vince McMahon multiple times. There's no fucking way they didn't send people over there to sabotage him. I will put money on it that a lot of the shit that happened to them came because the extra promoters were coming in and tearing him down. But also, this is also on the back end of Vince McMahon doing business dirty. When you do dirty business is going to come back on you. You can't go out there and just have a dog eat dog type of attitude and not expect it to not come back on you at some point. You may not bow now, but you will bow at some point. And it could be because your rivals have banded together to take you down, which I think actually happened. Them old white men was not going to let this young boy come in, take all of their shit, and then just sit back and be like, well, it's over and done with. There's no fucking way. Because they didn't build up them territories just for Vince McMahon to just steal everything, right? So there's no way they wasn't involved. I don't believe they weren't. I do not believe they weren't. I really think that they were involved in a lot of the scandals that was happening with Vince McMahon. Now, the shit that we found out about later, like the essaying scandals, the steroid shit, like I believe that Vince McMahon was doing all of these things. But what I really think is that a lot of these ex-promoters probably scorned wrestlers. They was like, shit, we gonna take this motherfucker down, which in my mind makes more sense, right? Because they would have the information. They would have the inside shit to be able to give to the people to actually go after these people. At least that's how my brain is processing it. Because I'm like, why would they just sit back and not say anything and not do anything? Especially when they had some of the information. They knew what was going on. They saw what was happening. And if I was them, I would have went to the investigative reporter and been like, hey, yo, Joel, listen, wrestling is not real. And Vince McMahon is trying to convince everybody that it is. So here's what you need to know about wrestling. Then have you been invited? So, like, I would have told everything. Everything. I would have narked on his ass. But anyways, to go back to the topic at hand, I apologize for going on the rant. So in this episode, they're explaining how they got to network television, how NBC Universal came up with Sunday night, Saturday night main event. And this was network television. This was the first time that what they called professional wrestling at the time was on network television. So it was a big deal. A lot of people were very, very excited about this. And of course, the superstars were excited. This is when wrestling went full on mainstream, and it hasn't looked back since. It's about to be a wild ride, people. So they're talking about the situation about them having the wrestlers unionized. The problem with that was, so let's start at the beginning. Like I said earlier, these wrestlers didn't have the opportunity to have breaks, to rest, to recoup, to be able to go to the doctor and be healed before they would start wrestling. If they got injured, they wouldn't get paid. So these guys would wrestle hurt. They would be taking painkillers. Everything that they would be doing would be to the detriment of themselves in order to maintain their livelihood and, of course, take care of their families if they have families. There was nothing that would force Vince McMahon and the company to take care of these people in any way, shape, or form. This wasn't like football or basketball or soccer or baseball, where their contracts would guarantee health care and various other things to maintain this particular person that we're paying these thousands of dollars or millions of dollars nowadays too. With that being said, Jesse the Body Ventura decided that we need to unionize. The WWE wrestling in general didn't have any unions. So there was nothing that would force the hand of the corporation to take care of the independent contractors or employees, whichever one you want to call them. So Jesse was going around to the wrestlers like, we need to create a union, we need to come in. And Hulk Hogan is a bitch, so he decided to rat him out. He went to Vince and was like, hey, Jesse's out here stirring up shit, trying to start a union. He knew if a union was started, I don't know why Hulk Hogan decided that the best thing for him to do was to rat everybody out. The union was for his success as well, for his health and his needs as well. But he decided to be loyal to Vince so that he can continue to be on top and get everything that he wanted. That had nothing to do with the industry or anything. That was all about self-preservation. It was, look at me, I'm a good old boy, I'm here, I'm your kid, woo, 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 woo. And then they decided to, Vince is like, oh, great, you're loyal to me, beautiful, here we go. Now, Vince is in the dark like nobody was going to go for it. Nobody cared. But there are people like Dave Meltzer and everybody else who say, well, he threatened to fire anybody who showed up to the meeting with Jesse the Body Ventura. So nobody showed up. So of course it's going to look like nobody cared about what he was talking about, because you threatened to fire anybody who actually cared about what he was talking about, bro. It's the nastiness of it that I really hated. I don't like that at all. The problem I had with this specifically is that Vince had to be in control. He has to be in control of everything. And then he's got these little spy snitches like Hulk Hogan who are only out for themselves. That's not stirring up shit to start a union. It was to protect your ass, because you said it yourself. In the last 10 years, you've had 23 surgeries. And it's like you're wrestling on TV 7 days a week. You could be injured, biceps torn, eye socket, orbital bone broken. Anything could happen to you. And the first thing you think of is, oh, gotta go snitch on Jesse because he wants us to be safe. Like, what is wrong with you, bro? So the union was not created and nobody followed through. But there was some underlying things. It wasn't all Hogan's fault. It was the fact that the wrestlers didn't really have any loyalty to themselves or to each other. They would all say they would band together, and then they would go back there and undercut and go with Vince McMahon because they knew that they could possibly get an opportunity out of being loyal to Vince rather than going against the grain and trying to protect themselves in the industry as a whole. They essentially were in business for themselves. So there was never, ever going to be any camaraderie for them to actually band together for this. But there obviously was some people who were willing to do it. But Vince made sure to let people know, you either are loyal to me and the company or you're going to be gone. And that's the environment he inspired. So because of that, everybody had a I'm going out for mines type of attitude. And that's the reason why the union would never work out. Now, they talked about WrestleMania 2. WrestleMania 2 was a bit of a disaster. They did WrestleMania 2 from 3 different cities. Don't really understand why they did that. I'm confused. The idea on paper probably looked and sounded good, but given the technology during that time, there were high technical difficulties, and it just didn't live up to the hype of WrestleMania 1, which was possible. That obviously was going to happen. But WrestleMania 3 was pivotal for WWE. Vince decided to go and get back Andre the Giant. By that time, Andre the Giant had left wrestling. He was doing TV and film, and he had severe back problems, and he was in pain. He ended up going to Andre and said, I want you to go get the surgery, get yourself together. Then I want you to come back, be a heel, and challenge Hulk Hogan for his championship at WrestleMania 3. And he was like, okay, well, how many people are going to be there? How many seats we talking about selling? And then said 93,000. And Andre the Giant kind of laughed and was like, oh, okay. But Vince was like, no, Andre, I'm serious. We're getting this venue in Michigan that seats 93,000 people. This is the largest venue at the moment. This was the largest venue that they could use. And Andre noticed he was serious. He says, okay, boss. So he went and got the surgery and came back as a heel. Andre the Giant, up until that point, was always a face character. So this was the first time you saw him as a true heel, and he was undefeated, I believe. So to have him go up against Hulk Hogan, it was a big thing. They were going to market it like this was the first time these two were ever going to compete. But because they had competed before during the time of the segregated territories, unless you were into wrestling at that time and really knew what was going on, you wouldn't have known that Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan had a history or a past. And because Vince decided to market this as if this was the first time these two were ever meeting, the people who exclusively watched WWF didn't know any the wiser that this person wasn't an old rival of Hulk Hogan's. They didn't know. So it was an easy way to market it, but also it was a good way to get Andre the Giant back in as a new character rather than letting him go with his babyface character. And so the problem came in when Andre the Giant had not told Mr. McMahon or Hulk Hogan if he was going to let Hogan go over on him that night. That was all left up in the air. He kept asking, Hulk Hogan, kept asking, hey, are you going to let me win? Like, what, am I losing? Like, what's going on? And Andre the Giant is like, look, don't worry. I got this. Vince is telling Hulk Hogan, look, he's going to do the right thing, so don't worry. And Hulk Hogan like, well, what is that? And I'm like, well, it's karma. Because you didn't have no problem taking initiative and taking out Iron Sheik and doing unnecessary shit during y'all match. So I don't understand why you all in your feelings and mad because nobody's giving you that same courtesy. And I feel like they are. I feel like they're giving you the same courtesy you've given other people. So karma's a bitch is the only way I can see explain it. Now, as time progressed, Hulkamania started to lose its shine. After Andre the Giant decided to preservably pass the torch to Hulk, they capitalized on it immediately. Merchandise, vitamins for kids. It went berserk. They basically blew out the back door of Hulkamania and they inflated the balloon before and pretty much blew it up till it exploded. And then Hulk started to lose a bit of his thunder. He didn't seem too happy about that. And then Ultimate Warrior came around, and Ultimate Warrior had bright colors, and he had the physique, he had the look, blonde hair. He had a mask, and everybody wanted to be the Ultimate Warrior. He was overly rambunctious, very infectious behavior. And he just had a more colorful look and appealed to the kids and young adults more than Hulk Hogan did. Plus, Hulk Hogan was of the earlier era of wrestling. And after a while, people just get tired and they want something different. They thought that Ultimate Warrior was the guy, but Ultimate Warrior ended up not being ready. He didn't really want the responsibility of carrying the business. He wasn't well liked backstage. Many of the superstars disliked him. And on top of that, he didn't have the same love for the business that, if you call that love, Terry had. So he didn't work out as the number one guy, despite the fact that he was put over by Hulk Hogan. So they figured they had to double back to Hulk Hogan, and they decided to use the Iraq War that was happening to double back to Hogan. This time they used Sergeant Slaughter. Sergeant Slaughter had decided to lay down his American flag and take up the Iraq flag and become an Iraqi sergeant. And he had become this big heel so that the American hero can come back and take him down. Sure. But the problem is it was 1991 around this time. And, well, the Iraq war was gearing up and getting worse. They invaded Kuwait. And this situation turned very, very dark. And I don't think Vince McMahon could have anticipated that. And that situation didn't help that WrestleMania was right around the corner and they now had to deal with the ramifications of utilizing reality in their stories. So essentially, Vince just went too far with this particular storyline. Once Iraq invaded Kuwait and the situation was very, very real, the storylines that were being used for WrestleMania were still going. Vince decided to not forego the storyline, and Sergeant Slaughter still representing himself as an Iraqi, turncoat. And this didn't sit well with American citizens, with people who were watching. It made them feel like it was just that these things were too close to home. They had families whose loved ones were fighting in that war. There were people who were dying, people who had died, and Vince it's almost like he had no concept of right and wrong, and he didn't care who it hurt, emotionally, physically, or mentally. He went with the story. Sergeant Slaughter was getting death threats. They were threatening to kill his wife and his children because people presumed that what they were seeing was real. And they needed that kayfabe to be alive in order to maintain the story. And they went on ahead with it. But a lot of people turned off from wrestling because they didn't like the way that it was going. And this was not the first time that they were going to be doing something weird and or stupid on WWE. So it moved into the steroid usage. The questions started to arise about the look of the superstars, and the name Dr. Zahorian started to come up. When Reagan took over the presidency, he implemented a war on drugs. This also led not only to a stricter drug policy, but this crackdown more on impoverished and urban neighborhoods. And that's another conversation for another day. Given the fact that the war on drugs included most drugs, during the time that WWE was in existence, steroid usage was not illegal yet. You were allowed to utilize steroids, but you were not allowed to prescribe and then sell the steroids. And Dr. Zaharian was doing that. He was assigned by the Athlete Commission in Pennsylvania to oversee WWE because of their sports protocol. A doctor had to be on staff. He was assigned to the E. He would check their blood pressure, their heart rate, their pulse, and everything. And then the wrestlers would ask, hey, I need painkillers. Do you have this? Do you have that? And Dr. Zaharian would then negotiate with them about what they could buy from him. So essentially, he was a street pharmacist. And he was a doctor, but he masqueraded as a doctor to be a street pharmacist, essentially. He was the dope boy for steroids in the E. And a lot of guys were using steroids because it was very common to do so. And at the time, it wasn't illegal until Reagan came in and changed the game. Once that happened, because you notice when you look at the olden days of wrestling, most of the guys that were stacked, built, or just naturally built muscle, they didn't have that extreme definition, the overly muscular men. They were muscular, but they looked like they got it from working on a farm or being these, just elite people that had that great physique and was able to build muscle and define that muscle and look like someone who was in shape without having the rigorous fitness schedule of, say, a bodybuilder. Well, then you start to notice how slowly things started to change with the look of the wrestlers. They all became extremely defined, big, bulky, muscular looking men. They were incredibly shredded and they were huge. And this is how you could tell that, steroids was involved. Vince McMahon admitted that he was taking steroids, and he definitely did. And he also did it like way after the steroid situation came into play. He took steroids again and he, moved forward. But Hulk Hogan also took steroids and then went on national TV on the Arsenio Hall show and completely and utterly denied it. Now, Vince is like, just tell the truth. If you're going to go on the show, just tell the truth. You don't need to lie. And he lied. This was a catalyst for a lot of problems, okay? First of all, you perjured yourself on TV because you go into court and say that you didn't take steroids and they have proof. That's a lie. You now lied on TV to the public. You've lied in court. Like, it's going to be a lot going on. And Vince was also venturing into other forms of entertainment, which he was doing the World Bodybuilding Federation. But because of the steroid scandal, he ended up having to fold it. He couldn't keep the bodybuilding situation going because this massive scandal cost them an opportunity. He enjoyed, the physiques and the definition, but these guys were using steroids too. And so Vince McMahon made a huge promise that when you see the WF symbol, that it is a drug-free, steroid-free zone for kids and families to watch our show, when that is not necessarily true. Child is messy around these parts, is all I can say. And so during this entire uptick of the steroid usage and wrestling being on par with being a part of pop culture, a journalist by the name of Phil Mushnick decided to use this as a means to deep dive and dig into everything. And he started to have his column report on Vince McMahon and everything. Now, Bruce Pritchard, Vince McMahon, they got a lot of love lost for this man. And Phil Mushnick was like, I do it because he's a dirtbag. I'm going after that fool because he a dirtbag. I was like, you know what? I fucks with that. Tell the truth and shame the devil. I don't like your ass, so I'm going to take your ass down. I know you ain't shit. You ain't shit. Your whole goddamn organization ain't shit. Everybody that work for you ain't shit. So I'm taking everybody down. Mushnick say he a dirtbag. Jesus. So not only do we have the steroid situation, we now have forayed into the essay. Because I want to preface this by making sure if you are triggered by this, which I am, this is going to be a rough part to listen to. If you are triggered by the conversation, I highly recommend that you fast forward. So there were multiple allegations of sexual assault. The women that were a part of the organization were not safe. Tony Atlas admitted that the men were abusive, sexually and physically and emotionally. They were abusive. He said women were just like objects. They were toys to them. They didn't mean anything to them. They were dehumanized immediately. It's disturbing, and as disturbing as that is, it gets even worse. There was a ring master, and then there were ring boys. And in this particular instance, his name, the guy that is in question's name is Mel Phillips. Mel Phillips was the ring master. And I guess you can call him like a ring announcer, and that's what they were referring to. And then there were ring boys who would come in and set up the cages and the rings and stuff and help take stuff down. And this particular guy would only hire young boys who were willing to commit or give them sexual favors to be hired. Not only were these young boys assaulted by Mel Phillips, they were also assaulted by two other executives within the company. And one of them was Terry Garvin. He was an executive in Connecticut. And the other one was Pat Patterson. Now, Pat Patterson is known for creating the Royal Rumble, but he's also been embroiled in multiple scandals when it comes to sex. In this case, he was accused of sexually assaulting the ring boys along with Terry Garvin and Mel Phillips. And he also gets involved in a sexual assault or sexual harassment case with an adult that bolsters him in the public eye, as well as various other people, because I believe it was a journalist that was sexually assaulted. And they end up going on these talk shows like Phil Donahue, Sally Jesse Raphael. And the scandal just keeps getting bigger and bigger. But in this case, when we're talking about the ring boys, I had no idea that this had even happened. I was unaware of this particular scandal. And it's very, very disheartening to know that young boys were being assaulted and essentially pimped out to these old ass men. This is rough. The Ring Boys child sex scandal ended up being settled. Phil Mushnick wrote about it and broke the scandal. And this was a big catalyst to them getting rid of the people who were committing these atrocities to these little boys. The little boy said that Terry Garvin offered him money and cocaine if he was to have sex with him. Pat Patterson groped him in on his butt and in his privates. Um, and of course, Mel Phillips was the ringleader. He was the one who was hiring the kids. And when this young boy refused, he was fired and let go from the company. Um, Everybody that spoke on this essentially was like, there was some blind eye turning in this situation, but none of us actually, in terms of Bret Hart, he was like, I do think there was a blind eye, but he said, I don't think anybody could actually prove what was being said because they didn't physically witness these assaults and they weren't there for the actual sexual assaults that was happening to these young kids. So for him, it was just like, we're getting rumblings that this is happening, but how do we prove this? And so these employees that operated under this guise of the cloak of hiring these young boys to be a part of WWE, they were fired. Mel Phillips was fired and disgraced. Terry Garvin was fired, and Pat Patterson resigned. But he didn't stay away too long, if we're being honest. Because I remember Pat Patterson being there when I was watching wrestling in the late 90s, early 2000s. He was there. A lot of the guys liked Pat Patterson, so they didn't believe that he was one of the people who were sexually assaulting or harassing these children. I'm gonna be honest, I do think that he was doing it. People, you always think you know somebody until you know them. And in this case, I know that it was a witch hunt against Pat Patterson because he was gay, and they automatically lumped you in with being depraved because you were gay. But I don't think that's the case. I don't think that little boy would have just called Pat Patterson out like, Pat Patterson grabbed me by my private parts and grabbed my butt. He wouldn't have just said that to be saying it. And then why would he just exclusively target Pat Patterson when he could have went after anybody if we were going to do that? You know what I mean? Like, why is Pat Patterson's name coming up in the conversation if he wasn't involved or at least committed something against some of these young boys? They wouldn't just say this. And I'm sorry, but I believe them. I believe the victims. I believe those kids when they say Pat Patterson did it. Now, Bruce Pritchard's bitch ass, he don't believe it. He feels like there was nothing to substantiate it or nothing. And you know what I say to that? It's always a situation of, can you prove it? And I don't know about you, but when I see a kid, this is a kid. This is a 16-year-old kid. And he's telling you that this man grabbed his genitals, grabbed his butt, and there was another man offering him money, offering coke for sexual favors. And in order for him to even get the job in the first place, he had to commit sexual favors. You're telling me that you don't believe this kid? You don't hear what this kid is saying and believe him enough to trust in what he's saying to protect him. You instead protect the adults who are perpetuating the bullshit. So I need to have some understanding. How is it that there was no evidence to substantiate Pat Patterson being an abuser, but there was evidence to substantiate Terry Garvin and Mel Phillips being abusers? Something in the milk ain't clean here. He dead ass sat there and said on the others, no comment, but Pat, there was no evidence to support it. I'm like, wait a minute. Now you can't just say no comment. So what is it that you know about the other two but don't know about Pat Patterson? This is bullshit. I don't like Bruce Pritchard. I don't like his chunky monkey ass. I don't like him. Nah, that man was an abuser, and Pat Patterson sexually assaulted more than just young boys. He assaulted young men as well. And Tony Atlas said he didn't like Pat Patterson because he used to grab his penis often. I know he did that shit. That man sexually assaulted them boys and he sexually assaulted them wrestlers because there's too many wrestlers coming out and saying this shit. And that man did that shit to that reporter that said he sexually assaulted him. I believe what he said is true. I'm not wavering on that. And I hope they bring it up in this doc, because I haven't gotten to that part yet. But if they bring it up, I'm going to be back in here hollering. I'm telling you. So let me clarify a few things. The guy that was accused, Pat Patterson, of sexually assaulting him and, offering sexual favors, he worked for WWE. And I keep getting him confused with the reporter, but he actually worked for WWE. So, yeah. Well, I just want to make sure I make that clear. So, Vince McMahon did not get proven guilty. I don't even think they said they did not charge anybody in the cases of the Ring Boy scandal or Rita Marie. Rita Marie came out and basically told her story about Vince McMahon demanding sexual favors from her in order to receive a $500,000 contract. And if she didn't comply and complete the task, she would be blackballed. She said that he forced her to give oral, and then when that wasn't enough for him, he made her climb on top of her, on him, and demanded sex from her. That lady was genuinely hurt. It looked like what she was saying was true, and I believe her. Vince swears up and down that it was a consensual relationship between the two of them. At least it was a consensual act of sex between the two of them. He said there was no assault. Vince claims that the relationship was consensual. He claims that they had consensual sex and there was no assault. There were no demands made on her. There were no promises of money or compensation for her, pleasing him, as Rita stated. He said none of that was true. It was all BS. And then when she came out, a lot of the rhetoric around her was, well, what are you trying to get out of this? Excuse me, y'all, for yawning. It's not the topic. I'm just sleepy. What are you trying to get out of this? What's your angle? Is this about money? Like, what is this about? And that is a question that is often asked when powerful men are being questioned for their behavior and their sexual deviancy. And I find that to be very interesting, that it somehow was on the woman to stop this man from making sexual advances at her, or somehow on this woman to keep her mouth shut about a time where it was very traumatic for her. It felt very traumatic for her to relive and recount this. And your question to her is, well, what's your angle? What do you want? What does everybody want when they are hurt, assaulted, or stolen from, or beaten up? Like, everybody wants justice. However that may come to you is how it may come. Like, you want justice. You want them to serve time, or at least be punished for the actions that have hurt you mentally, physically, and emotionally. That's the point. She wants justice. It's not about her trying to get money. You only sue when that's the only angle that you can go, when that's the only available lane for you, because criminally they can't prove what you're saying because the statute of limitations ran out. And when Rita Marie came forward, by that time, the statute of limitations had ran out. They couldn't do a rape kit on the woman. And a lot of things were just not possible due to the fact that she didn't come forward earlier. But as you can see with how people reacted to her, you can understand why she didn't come forward. People automatically saw her as a gold digger. She's trying to get money. Like, she doesn't really care about the fact that she could be destroying this man's life. She just trying to get money. It's weird that the main focus, or the automatic veil that comes down over people's eyes, is that woman is trouble and this man is obviously innocent because she just wants his money and power. It is very, very, very disheartening to hear something like that. It's disrespectful, and it really hurts because As a woman, you don't feel protected when you hear these things. And it makes you not want to come forward to talk about, sexual assault, because it's very difficult in the times. Like, not to go off topic, but the Diddy situation is massive, right? And when you see how men react and respond to this, it also reassures why a lot of victims do not come forward, because the question or the narrative is always, white men don't never go through white men don't never get the same treatment or behavior that the black men do. And that's not true when it comes to these types of cases. Or the narrative is, she just trying to get money. She really don't want no justice, because if she did, she would have said something sooner. They said this when Cassie came out with her lawsuit and won her lawsuit. The first thing they said was that all she's trying to do is get Diddy's money, when that's not true at all, because she didn't need it. Number two, they said this shit when Dawn Richards' lawsuit just dropped. Said she just trying to jump on the bandwagon and get some money. That $100,000 lawsuit Diddy just lost to that other guy that filed a lawsuit against him for sexual assault. Said the same thing about him. When it comes to sexual assault and these lawsuits, the civil route is the only route that they have, because the statute of limitations on all of these assaults have come and gone. The only thing that doesn't have a statute of limitations on it is murder. That is the only thing. Everything else has a time frame. Okay? Diddy, and there's so many things that Diddy has done, and it's very comparable to Vince McMahon's situation, Jeffrey Epstein's situation, Donald Trump's situation, and Harvey Weinstein's situation. These people are people who were prominent fixtures in the pop culture and in Hollywood, in various forms of entertainment. Diddy with music, Harvey Weinstein in movies and TV. And then you have Vince McMahon with wrestling entertainment. Donald Trump being just a trust fund kid, literally famous for being an idiot. And Jeffrey Epstein was always lurking behind the scenes as one of the biggest con men in Hollywood. What do all these men have in common? The power that they wielded with the coercion, the blackmail, and the sexual deviancy and depravity that they embarked, or basically just lorded over women and men with. And the fact that they also hoard other predators is alarming. Pat Patterson was a predator. I don't care what anybody says. You can get mad and get in your feelings. And the only reason why he was allowed to come back was because Vince McMahon protected him. Not only that, but they brought up in this documentary about Jimmy Superfly Snuka, when it came to women in this company, they were never protected. Tony Atlas admitted it and said it loud, that all the wrestlers treated women like toys. They didn't treat them like human beings. They were dehumanized. Jimmy Snuka's girlfriend died in a hotel. And just recently they found out that he actually beat that woman to death, and she died because of it, by his hand. When this whole time it's been alluded to that Vince McMahon helped him, kind of skate by, no one really knows the truth. The lore and the BS of wrestling can conflate the truth and change the narrative. And with years going by, everybody's telling a different story. And the only one who knows the truth is either dead or he don't want you to know what really happened. These things have culminated into the perfect storm. But Vince McMahon never got convicted for the Ring Boys. He never got charged for the situations with the sexual harassment. The only thing Vince McMahon got convicted of was distributing steroids via Dr. Zahorian, which I think is very interesting way to loop Vince McMahon into the fold with this. Now, Vince admitted to using steroids at one point in time, but he said he has since stopped. Some of the wrestlers had admitted to using steroids. And then you had Hulk Hogan, who was basically on, I don't use steroids. I've only used them 3 times. When in all actuality, every wrestler that had been a part of WWE or knew he was a part of it, they snitched on his ass and was like, no, you have been using drugs. Your ass has been using steroids your entire career, which I can believe. See, this is what happens when you don't mind your fucking business. Then on top of that, not only was you using drugs, but you got mad because the crowd was no longer on your side. This is what happened with Sid Vicious when Sid was in the E and Sid was supposed to beat Hulk Hogan and go over. The crowd was on Sid's side. They was in New York. It was his hometown. Hogan didn't like the fact that they was booing him. He didn't like the fact that he wasn't the hero anymore. But his star and his light was going down because Hulkamania was not running wild like he thought anymore. And people were getting tired of him. This good old boy image. The very same thing that was happening to John Cena and actually happened to John Cena is what would have happened to Hulk Hogan if he had continued down that path. But he chose not to do that, which he's well within his right to do. You feel me? Nobody's saying he was wrong. I'm just saying the way Hulk Hogan went about it and the way he acted, because not everybody was caring about the fact that he was there. He wasn't that big of a deal to everyone anymore. He was very much in his feelings. He was very much tight about that. So much so that the man ended up retiring, which I feel like you could have just said you wanted to go home and take a break. But then again, this is the 90s, early 90s of Vince McMahon's era of wrestling. And if taking a break could mean you get fired anyway. So he was like, look, I'm just going to go ahead and tuck my tail and go home. But that's not what actually ended up happening. But we get to that because now they bringing up WCW and Ted Turner. And see, what Vince did when it came to the territories is the same thing that happened to him. Ted Turner took his blueprint and circumvented and stole some of his wrestlers right from underneath him, created his own stars, and started moving into a place where his program was overtaking WWE's. So WWE had to start pivoting and changing their programming. All the while, Vince McMahon is fighting for his life in court, sitting up there with a neck brace on because he went and had neck surgery. Fighting for his life in court, defending himself against these assault allegations, trying to make it seem like everybody in the E is a family. These people were being sexually harassed by your executives, and then because of that harassment, one of these people got fired because they wouldn't accept Pat Patterson's advances, and you didn't do nothing about it. Pat Patterson had him fired, and you was just like, okay, whatever. The man is like, I got fired after I didn't accept his sexual advances. What do you call that? That's sexual harassment. There was so much drama in the LBC. It was kind of hard being Vinnie Mac, honey. Not Snoop D-O double G. Vinnie Mac. But let us finish this doc out, shall we? We shall. So in comes Ted Turner. Ted Turner was Vince McMahon's biggest op. And essentially what Ted Turner did was he undercut him like any other good businessman would do. WWE was offering big checks, but they were also taking time. Time, and the body was taking a lot of damage and trauma. Whereas Ted Turner was offering big money, and you had the opportunity to set your time. So you could be wrestling, you might make $1 million a year, and you might wrestle, 100 days out of that year instead of 360 days out of the year. WWE was forcing their superstars to wrestle 7 days a week, 52 weeks out of the year, right? Well, you turn around and you're looking at this contract that has similar money or equal money or better money, and then the time is better. And the way that Eric Bischoff snaked in and got Hogan to come in was like, listen, you want to work, you want to come back to wrestling, that's fine. You're hating this acting thing because you're in a trailer, you're coming out, you're having to read lines and all that other stuff, and that's just not something that you enjoy. You want to come back to wrestling, cool. So what do you want in exchange? And Hogan was like, my kids are very important to me. I have 2 very young kids at home. I want to be home for my kids. I don't want to be on the road for 300 days out of the year, never seeing my family. Eric Bischoff said, okay, done. We'll work your schedule around you. So you might have 30 appearances instead of 300 appearances, and you would still be compensated the money that you rightfully deserve for the star that you are. And this is where Bischoff really built his name in WCW as a producer and, one of the executive producers of the show. And this was the catalyst to building WCW into the conglomerate that it became before it collapsed on itself, before Vince came back and reworked and took some shit over. But Bischoff was integral in almost taking down WWE, and it all started right there. So, as time progressed, Hulk Hogan appears in WCW and flips and starts working with Ted Turner, and he has his first feud with none other than the incomparable Ric Flair. Now, as this is all going on, Vince McMahon is being buried under legalities. Meanwhile, the government has subpoenaed Hulk Hogan to testify against Vince McMahon, and he was granted immunity because the government had shit on Hulk Hogan for using drugs, probably administering these steroids, probably distributing them, or, bringing people to it. Whatever evidence they had against him, they were saying he was looking at 17 years if he didn't comply and testify against Mr. McMahon. So they granted him immunity, and then he testified. And what's funny is to me, it's like this motherfucker dry snitched on everybody and everything, but when it came time for him to eat some motherfucking wood, that nigga said, hell no, I'm spilling on everybody. Oh, shit. Like, wow, it didn't take much. It was the threatening of jail time. But like, nigga, I'm ratting you out, bro. You my op, I don't give a fuck. Not to mention, Vince was highly hurt and disappointed that his greatest creation in Hulk Hogan, or at least one of them, in Hulk Hogan, left and joined his op like that. He didn't give him no heads up, and he lied to his face. They had that meeting, and Terry told him, I'm not about to join no other promotion. I'm not wrestling no more. He agreed to it, told him he was done. And then as soon as he got a decent deal with Ted Turner, his ass was back on TV, wrestling under Hulkamania and shit, underneath Vince's, all of his character work, everything that Vince did to create anything that Hulk Hogan said, anything that Hulk Hogan embodied, it was all Vince McMahon's creation of this character. Hulk Hogan was nothing without the branding and geniuses of Vince McMahon. So he took all of that and was like, okay, I'm going to motherfucking WCW. Vince like, well, goddamn, I ain't trying to take up for the man. I'm just saying, if that was me, I'd probably be like, well, goddamn, dog, you could have at least called, and be like, hey, Ted Turner's offering me this and this for this amount of time out the year. You could have gave him a heads up. You done gave him a heads up about everything else. But that just goes to show you there ain't no loyalty in this game. The only loyalty is to yourself. He didn't have no problem with sabotaging everybody around him when it came to them creating that union. He didn't have no problem doing that. He did it with no malice. But as soon as he got the opportunity to make some more money than what he was making with Vince and to do it with half the amount of time, he wasn't giving Vince no loyalty, which means he was never loyal to the company to begin with. A snake is a snake is all I'm trying to tell you. But Vince should have known better. He should have known better because a snake should recognize another snake, honey. So this is the end of episode 2, y'all. Lord have mercy. We've been here for 3 hours. We are on episode 3. I am 2 minutes in. I'm going to start the next episode. And I'm telling y'all, we're going to give y'all a full blow by blow on everything. I promise y'all, we are going to make this as easy and as simple as possible for y'all to hear. I'm uploading the first episode, editing it now as we speak. And that will be uploaded soon. I don't even know if I'm going to be able to get through this until 6 o'clock. I'll be all the way up until I go live tonight because, baby, everything that I'm hearing and seeing is craziness. But y'all keep it locked. We're going to keep this going. We on to episode 3. Episode 3 is called The Screw Job. Vince McMahon got a lot of those. Montreal screw job. The Wendy Richter screw job. We got a lot of work to do, y'all.